The morning mist clings to the moss-covered timbers like forgotten memories. 57-year-old Inge stands before the crumbling longhall that cost her 1 silver piece, all she could afford after her father's funeral. The villagers whisper behind cupped hands, the spinster bought a ruin. The great oak doors hang askew, and wild vines crawl through gaps in the stone foundation. But something catches the early light, a silver arm ring embedded in the doorframe, its surface dulled by decades of neglect, yet still gleaming with promise. Sometimes the greatest discoveries come when we feel we have nothing left to lose. When life has passed you by and others see only what you failed to become, that's when true strength reveals itself. What happens when a woman thought past her prime discovers she carries the power to heal an entire community? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Inge's weathered hands trace the silver ring as memories flood back like tide, returning to a familiar shore. 37 years ago, she left this place after her mother Astrid's death, fleeing her father's rage and disappointment that burned hotter than any hearth fire. Harold the Bold had wanted sons, warriors who would carry his name into legend through deed and battle. Instead, he got a daughter who preferred gathering herbs in the forest to practicing sword work in the yard, who listened to her mother's whispered songs more carefully than his booming commands. The village of Raven's Hollow had watched her leave with the relief of farmers watching storm clouds pass overhead. One less mouth to feed during the lean months, one less burden when times grew hard. She had been 19 then, her mother's healing knowledge still half-formed in her mind, her heart already given to Eric the Gentle, a trader's son who promised her a life far from her father's shadow. Now she returns as a widow herself, her black hair streaked with silver like frost on winter ground. Eric died 3 winters past in the Southlands, his gentle heart finally giving out after years of patient love and quiet strength. Their marriage had been blessed with contentment, if not children of their own, though Magnus, Eric's son from his first wife, had become the child of her heart. The inheritance letter from her father's steward had been brief as a knife thrust. The hall and its contents are yours by right of blood. 1 silver piece covers the outstanding debts to village creditors. Even in death, Harold had found a way to show his contempt. The great hall stretches before her like a cathedral built by giants and abandoned by gods. Massive oak beams, black with centuries of hearth smoke and age, span a space that once housed 40 warriors in the days when Harold's reputation drew ambitious young men from distant lands. Tapestries hang in tatters along the walls, their proud battle scenes now home to mice and moths, the gold thread that once caught firelight now dulled to the color of old brass. The long tables where feasts thundered with boasts and songs now sag under the weight of fallen roof tiles and 40 years of neglect. Shafts of morning light stream through broken shutters, illuminating motes of dust that dance like tiny spirits in the amber air. The great hearth stands cold and empty, its stones stained black with the memory of countless fires. Above it, Harold's weapons still hang on their pegs, sword and axe and shield, bearing the scars of real battle, not the polished perfection of ceremonial pieces. The sight of them brings no warmth to Inge's heart, only the familiar ache of a daughter who could never be what her father wanted. But as she moves deeper into the hall, her trained eye begins to see beyond the ruin. In the morning light filtering through gaps in the roof, she spots familiar shapes scattered near the cold hearth, her mother's healing stones. Smooth river rocks carved with protective runes that once channeled the ancient wisdom of the healing arts. Astrid had been more than Harold's wife. She had been the village's true healer, keeper of knowledge passed down through generations of wise women who understood that some wounds could not be mended with sword or prayer alone. Inge kneels and gathers the stones with reverent care, feeling their familiar weight in her palms. Each one tells a story, this one for fevers, that one for difficult births, another for the deep wounds of the heart that show no blood but kill just as surely. The runes carved into their surfaces seemed to warm at her touch, as if recognizing the hands that should have inherited their care decades ago. The sound of approaching voices draws her attention back to the present. The villagers are coming to see the new owner of the ruined hall, curiosity overcoming their natural caution. Through the broken doorway, she recognizes faces aged by time, but still familiar. Bjorn the blacksmith, his beard now silver instead of the rich brown she remembered. His massive frame still imposing despite the years. Sigrid the weaver, her sharp eyes softened by age, but missing nothing as she surveys the damage to what was once the finest building in Ravenshollow. Little Inge, Bjorn says, his voice gentler than she expected. Though I suppose you're not so little anymore. Your mother would be proud to see you standing here, would she? Inge asks, genuine uncertainty in her voice. I ran away, Bjorn. I left her knowledge to gather dust while I played at being a merchant's wife in lands that never knew her name. You left because you had to. Sigrid interjects with the directness that had made her one of Astrid's closest friends. Harold would have crushed the healer's gift right out of you if you'd stayed. Your mother knew that. Why do you think she never tried to call you home? Other faces appear, some welcoming, others cautious, a few openly skeptical. Young Thorvald the chieftain steps forward, and Inge is struck by how much he resembles his father, who had been Harold's closest companion in their raiding days. Thorvald has inherited not just his father's position, but his commanding presence, the kind of natural authority that makes others step aside without conscious thought. The hall has been empty too long, Thorvald says, his tone carefully neutral. The village has wondered what would become of it. Some thought it should be torn down, the stones used for more practical buildings. Inge hears the unspoken question in his words. What are your intentions? Will you stay or sell and disappear again? She looks around at the gathering crowd, seeing 3 generations of faces marked by the hard realities of northern life. Long winters, uncertain harvests, the constant threat of raiders from across the sea. These are people who have learned to be practical above all else, to waste nothing and trust little. I plan to restore it, she says simply, her voice carrying more clearly than she expected. Not as my father's hall, but as something it was meant to be before he claimed it. Thorvald's eyebrows rise slightly. And what was it meant to be? Inge looks down at the healing stones in her hands, feeling the weight of generations in their smooth surfaces. A place of healing. A place of wisdom, a sanctuary for those who need shelter from the storms of the world. The silence that follows is not hostile, but it is skeptical. These are people who have learned that good intentions are not enough to survive northern winters or Danish raids. They need proof, not promises. Inge Astridsdottir, says a new voice, and she turns to see an elderly woman she doesn't immediately recognize. I am Ragnhild, Olaf's daughter. You probably don't remember me. I was just a child when you left. But I remember your mother's hands on my fevered brow when the winter sickness nearly took me. If you carry even half her gift, this village will be blessed to have you. The words bring unexpected tears to Inge's eyes. She had forgotten how generous these people could be, how ready to hope even after disappointment. I don't know how much of her gift I carry, she admits. I've had little chance to use it these past decades. But I'm willing to learn again, if you're willing to teach me. As the crowd begins to disperse, Thorvald lingers. The hall will need more than good intentions to restore, he says quietly. The roof alone will cost more silver than most families see in a year. And there are those who remember your father's debts. Not all were settled by that single coin. I know, Inge replies. But sometimes the most important repairs are the ones you can't see from the outside. As sunset paints the ruins in shades of gold and amber, Inge makes her decision with the certainty of water finding its course. She will stay. She will rebuild. Not as Harold's daughter trying to win a dead man's approval, but as Astrid's heir, carrying forward a legacy of healing and wisdom that predates the warrior's pride by generations uncounted. The villagers may doubt, Thorvald may calculate, but deep in her bones she feels something awakening, the call of blood to purpose. of exile to homecoming, of a woman finally ready to claim her inheritance, not just of stones and timber, but of knowledge and responsibility that should have been hers all along. Word of Inge's discovery spreads through Ravenshollow like ripples in a still pond, carried by the kind of whispered conversations that travel faster than any messenger. The village has always survived on gossip as much as grain, and the news that the spinster has found something significant in her ruined hall provides the most interesting topic of conversation in years. Some villagers whisper of witchcraft, their voices dropping to hushed tones when they speak of the ancient chamber and its mysterious contents. Others remember the old stories their grandmothers told on winter nights, tales of wise women who could heal with a touch and foresee weather changes in the flight of birds. The reactions split along lines as old as the settlement itself, dividing those who remember Astrid's gifts with fond nostalgia from those who have embraced the newer Christian teachings brought by Father Olaf. The older villagers approach Inge's restoration work with cautious hope, remembering how much simpler life seemed when there was always someone who knew which herbs would break a fever or ease the pain of childbirth. But the younger families, raised on sermons about the dangers of pagan practices, either haul with suspicion and cross themselves when they pass its broken walls. Inge begins the delicate work of restoration with the patience of a woman who has learned that some things cannot be rushed. Instead of clearing all the overgrowth that has claimed the hall's exterior, she tends it like a garden, preserving the medicinal plants that have seeded themselves among the ruins over decades of neglect. Her mother's knowledge flows back to her as if it had been waiting in her blood all these years. The recognition of feverfew growing wild beneath the eaves, the careful harvest of willow bark for pain relief, the proper way to gather elderflowers at the moment when their healing properties reach peak potency. Each plant tells a story of survival and adaptation, thriving in the shelter of broken walls, the way wisdom often flourishes in the shadow of apparent defeat. Inge works with her hands in the soil and her mind reaching back through layers of memory, recalling lessons that had seemed like simple country knowledge when she was young but now reveal themselves as fragments of a systematic understanding that goes back generations. The first to seek her help arrives with the early morning mist, as if drawn by forces deeper than conscious choice. Young Ragnhild, the miller's daughter, appears at the hall's broken doorway with her infant son burning with fever, the child's small body racked by the kind of sickness that has claimed too many babies in recent years. The village healer, an elderly man trained only in bloodletting and prayers, had shaken his head and spoken of God's will, leaving the young mother with nothing but her own desperate hope. "Please," Ragnhild whispers, her voice breaking with exhaustion and fear. "My grandmother used to tell stories about your mother. She said Astrid could cool fevers with song and herbs. I know you've been gone. I know you might not remember the old ways. But my son—" Her words dissolve into tears that speak more clearly than any plea. Inge takes the burning child with hands that remember this weight, this responsibility. The baby's fever is high, but not yet dangerous, the kind of sickness that responds well to the right combination of herbs and careful nursing. She brews a tisane from willow bark and elderflower, adding honey to make it palatable and singing the ancient healing songs her mother had hummed while working. The melodies feel strange on her lips after decades of disuse, but they return with the muscle memory of the heart. Through the long day and into evening, Inge tends the sick child with a patience that surprises even herself. She bathes the small body in cool water infused with healing herbs, feeds him drops of the tisane when he can swallow, and most importantly, maintains the steady rhythm of the healing songs that seem to reach parts of the illness that herbs alone cannot touch. By sunset, the fever breaks with the dramatic suddenness that marks a true healing, and the child's eyes clear as he looks up at his mother with renewed recognition. But Inge's methods attract attention that brings both opportunity and danger. Father Olaf arrives the next morning with Thorvald in support, their presence casting a shadow over what should have been a celebration of the child's recovery. The priest, recently arrived from the southern kingdoms with a mission to convert the remaining pagans in the northern settlements, sees in Inge's healing both a threat to his authority and an opportunity to demonstrate the superiority of Christian faith over heathen practices. "These are the devil's arts," he declares, his voice carrying across the village square, where curious onlookers have gathered. God's healing comes through prayer and proper faith, not through herb witchery and songs that call upon powers no Christian should invoke. His words are calculated to frighten, but they also reveal his own uncertainty. If the old ways held no power, why would they threaten the new faith so greatly? Thorvald nods gravely, though his motives are more practical than spiritual. He has watched the restoration of the hall with growing unease, recognizing that Inge's growing influence represents a challenge to the order he has worked years to establish. A village that turns to the hall for healing and wisdom is a village that depends less on its chieftain's protection. And a leader whose authority rests on being indispensable cannot afford to have alternatives available to his people. The village needs leadership that looks forward, not backward, Thorvald says, his tone reasonable but his meaning clear. "We've survived by adapting to the world as it is, not as our grandparents imagined it should be. These old practices may seem harmless, but they encourage people to rely on superstition rather than practical solutions." Meanwhile, Magnus works to understand the economic potential hidden in his mother's inheritance, with the thoroughness of a merchant who has learned that knowledge is often more valuable than gold. The ancient trade routes marked on the runestone maps suggest possibilities that excite him more than any cargo manifest he has ever examined. Raven's Hollow once sat at the crossroads of three major trading paths, one leading to the southern kingdoms, where silk and spices commanded premium prices, one following the eastern rivers, where amber and furs travelled in quantities that could make fortunes, and one reaching to the western islands, rich in silver and exotic goods that northern markets had rarely seen. The old hall wasn't just a feast place, he explains to his mother as they examine the carved maps by torchlight. It was a trading post, a neutral ground where merchants could rest and exchange goods safely. That's why it's built with such thick walls and has those storage chambers we thought were just cellars. This place was designed to house not just people, but valuable cargo, to serve as a secure way station for traders who needed to trust their goods would be safe while they conducted business. In one of the hall's upper chambers, they discover an ancient loom that confirms Magnus's theory. The massive frame, carved from wood that has been seasoned to the hardness of stone, still holds threads of pure gold woven into a tapestry that depicts not the usual scenes of battle and conquest, but something far more remarkable. The golden threads trace the movements of merchant caravans, their goods spread in peaceful display, their negotiations conducted under the protection of neutral authority rather than at the point of a sword. The message woven into the precious metal is clear to any who know how to read it. The hall's true strength had never come from the warriors it housed, but from the wisdom that made warriors unnecessary. The prosperity depicted in the golden threads speaks of trade agreements honored across generations, of disputes resolved through mediation rather than violence, of wealth that grew through cooperation rather than conquest. As autumn deepens and the first frost touches the morning grass, more people begin to seek Inge out quietly, not always for healing, but for the older forms of wisdom that the Christian teachings cannot provide. Young mothers want to know the proper songs for their children's cradles, melodies that carry protection and blessing in their ancient rhythms. Farmers ask about the old ways of reading weather signs, knowledge that could mean the difference between successful harvest and winter hunger. Even some of Thorvald's own warriors stop by, ostensibly for herbs to treat minor injuries, but staying to hear the stories carved in the runestones, tales of their ancestors that are fuller and richer than the simple battle sagas. usually told around evening fires. Winter's approach brings both challenges and unexpected revelations that will reshape everything Inge thought she knew about her inheritance. The first snow falls early, blanketing Raven's Hollow in white silence that muffles sound and makes the restored portions of the hall seem to glow with warmth against the stark landscape. With the early snow comes Thorvald's pressure, applied with the subtle skill of a leader who has learned that direct confrontation often creates martyrs while quiet. Influence can isolate opponents. He spreads word throughout the village that Inge's presence brings misfortune. Why else would winter come so soon after her return? His warriors begin visiting those who have sought her help, not threatening directly, but making their disapproval clear through presence and meaningful silence. The visits are carefully crafted to seem like normal social calls, but everyone understands the message. The chieftain notices who seeks the hall's help, and such notice is rarely a comfortable thing. But Inge has discovered something in the hall's upper reaches that transforms her understanding of what her ancestors actually preserved. Working by torchlight to repair sections of the roof damaged by decades of weather, she notices that the massive support beams, blackened by centuries of hearth smoke, conceal intricate carvings beneath their dark surface. What she initially takes for simple decoration reveals itself as something far more sophisticated. Star maps more detailed and accurate than any she has seen, their precision suggesting knowledge that goes far beyond casual observation of the night sky. The carved constellations cover the entire ceiling, transforming the hall's upper reaches into a three-dimensional representation of the heavens. But these aren't merely decorative stars, they're navigation charts of extraordinary accuracy, showing not just the positions of constellations, but their movements through the seasons, the way they shift with latitude, and most remarkably, their correlation to the trade routes marked on the stone maps below. Magnus, who has navigated northern seas for more than 20 years and knows the stars as well as any captain, stares at the ceiling carvings with something approaching reverence. These aren't just pretty decorations, he tells his mother, his voice thick with wonder. They're the most sophisticated navigation system I've ever encountered. See here, the trading routes marked on the stones below correspond exactly to the stellar positions carved above. This hall was designed as a guide for traveling merchants, a place where they could recalibrate their journeys and plan routes with precision that would be the envy of any royal navigator. The discovery attracts an unexpected visitor who arrives with the first major blizzard of the season. Leif the Learned, an elderly skald who has traveled all the northern lands collecting stories and wisdom, seeks shelter just as the wind begins to howl with genuine menace. Storm-bound in the hall for 3 days, he examines the star carvings and runestones with the methodical attention of someone who has made knowledge his life's pursuit. I have seen fragments of such wisdom in Ireland, where the monks preserve old Celtic learning, and in the Eastern kingdoms, where Byzantine scholars guard ancient Greek texts, Leif tells them on the second night, his weathered face grave in the firelight. But never have I encountered so complete a collection in one place. Your mother's line didn't just preserve healing recipes and weather signs. They maintained an entire system of the old wisdom, a complete framework for understanding how the world actually works. Leif's presence brings legitimacy to what Inge is attempting in ways that surprise her. When villagers see the respected skald copying runes with careful reverence and asking thoughtful questions about healing practices, they begin to reconsider their suspicions. Knowledge that impresses a learned man who has studied in the great centers of learning cannot be dismissed as mere witchcraft or countryside superstition. During the long winter nights when wind rattles the shutters and snow drifts against the walls, Leif helps Inge decode the more complex sections of the runestone texts. What they discover goes far beyond simple healing recipes or weather prediction. The stones contain detailed instructions for organizing communities, not through the application of force, but through the careful cultivation of mutual benefit. The ancient priestesses had been more than healers. They had been advisors, negotiators, and most importantly, keepers of the social bonds that held settlements together during the kind of hard times that could tear communities apart. Your ancestors understood something we seem to have forgotten. Leif explains one evening as they work by the light of oil lamps fueled by rendered fat. True strength doesn't come from having the sharpest sword or the most fearsome reputation. It comes from creating connections between people that make swords unnecessary. These halls weren't built to house warriors preparing for battle. They were built to house wisdom that made battles avoidable. The runestones reveal a sophisticated understanding of human nature and social organization that impresses even the well-traveled skald. They speak of justice systems based on restoration rather than punishment, of economic arrangements that ensured prosperity was shared rather than hoarded, of diplomatic methods that could resolve conflicts before they escalated to violence. The knowledge is practical rather than mystical, grounded in centuries of observation about what actually works when people must live together in difficult circumstances. As winter deepens and the hall becomes an unofficial gathering place for those seeking shelter from the worst storms, the space begins to fulfill its ancient purpose without conscious planning. Stormbound travelers share news from distant lands, creating an informal network of information that proves valuable to farmers planning next year's crops and traders calculating which goods will be in demand come spring. Young people come initially to hear Leif's tales of distant wonders, but stay to learn from Inge's growing collection of practical knowledge. Even some of Father Olaf's congregation begin slipping in quietly during the worst weather, finding that the old healing songs and the Christian prayers can coexist in their hearts without contradiction. The herbs that ease winter coughs work regardless of the faith of those who gather them, and the stories that preserve important knowledge serve their purpose whether told by Christian or pagan voices. But Thorvald's opposition hardens as he watches the informal gatherings and recognizes the threat they represent to his carefully maintained authority. When his own wife, Astrid, named for Inge's mother in the days when such naming was considered an honor, brings their daughter for treatment of a persistent cough that has lingered since the first snowfall, he makes his displeasure known in ways that cannot be ignored. "My family will seek help from the village healer or from Father Olaf's prayers," he announces publicly in the village square. "We will not encourage practices that divide our community or undermine the faith that has sustained us." But his words ring hollow to those who remember that the village healer has already admitted his inability to help the child. And Father Olaf's prayers, however sincere, have not broken the fever that threatens to settle into her lungs. Magnus uses the enforced isolation of winter to develop plans that could transform Ravenshallow's prospects completely. The stellar navigation charts, he realizes, could revolutionize northern trade if properly utilized. Come spring, he will take copies of the most important sections and use them to re-establish connections with trading networks that have operated without Ravenshallow for decades. If Inge can restore the hall's ancient role as a center of wisdom and neutral ground for dispute resolution, he can restore its equally important function as a secure way station for valuable cargo and a meeting place for merchants who need to trust in fair dealing. Winter's approach brings both challenges and unexpected revelations that will reshape everything Inge thought she knew about her inheritance. The first snow falls early, blanketing Ravenshallow in white silence that muffles sound and makes the restored portions of the hall seem to glow with warmth against the stark landscape. With the early snow comes Thorvald's pressure, applied with the subtle skill of a leader who has learned that direct confrontation often creates martyrs while quiet. Influence can isolate opponents. He spreads word throughout the village that Inge's presence brings misfortune. Why else would winter come so soon after her return? His warriors begin visiting those who have sought her help, not threatening directly, but making their disapproval clear through presence and meaningful silence. The visits are carefully crafted to seem like normal social calls, but everyone understands the message. The chieftain notices who seeks the hall's help, and such notice is rarely a comfortable thing. But Inge has discovered something in the hall's upper reaches that transforms her understanding of what her ancestors actually preserved. Working by torchlight to repair sections of the roof damaged by decades of weather, she notices that the massive support beams, blackened by centuries of hearth smoke, conceal intricate carvings beneath their dark surface. What she initially takes for simple decoration reveals itself as something far more sophisticated. Star maps more detailed and accurate than any she has seen, their precision suggesting knowledge that goes far beyond casual observation of the night sky. The carved constellations cover the entire ceiling, transforming the hall's upper reaches into a three-dimensional representation of the heavens. But these aren't merely decorative stars, they're navigation charts of extraordinary accuracy, showing not just the positions of constellations, but their movements through the seasons, the way they shift with latitude, and most remarkably, their correlation to the trade routes marked on the stone maps below. Magnus, who has navigated northern seas for more than 20 years and knows the stars as well as any captain, stares at the ceiling carvings with something approaching reverence. "These aren't just pretty decorations," he tells his mother, his voice thick with wonder. "They're the most sophisticated navigation system I've ever encountered. See here, the trading routes marked on the stones below correspond exactly to the stellar positions carved above. This hall was designed as a guide for traveling merchants, a place where they could recalibrate their journeys and plan routes with precision that would be the envy of any royal navigator. The discovery attracts an unexpected visitor who arrives with the first major blizzard of the season. Leif the Learned, an elderly skald who has traveled all the northern lands collecting stories and wisdom, seeks shelter just as the wind begins to howl with genuine menace. Storm-bound in the hall for 3 days, he examines the star carvings and runestones with the methodical attention of someone who has made knowledge his life's pursuit. I have seen fragments of such wisdom in Ireland, where the monks preserve old Celtic learning, and in the Eastern kingdoms, where Byzantine scholars guard ancient Greek texts, Leif tells them on the second night, his weathered face grave in the firelight. "But never have I encountered so complete a collection in one place. Your mother's line didn't just preserve healing recipes and weather signs. They maintained an entire system of the old wisdom, a complete framework for understanding how the world actually works." Leif's presence brings legitimacy to what Inge is attempting in ways that surprise her. When villagers see the respected skald copying runes with careful reverence and asking thoughtful questions about healing practices, they begin to reconsider their suspicions. Knowledge that impresses a learned man who has studied in the great centers of learning cannot be dismissed as mere witchcraft or countryside superstition. During the long winter nights when wind rattles the shutters and snow drifts against the walls, Leif helps Inge decode the more complex sections of the runestone texts. What they discover goes far beyond simple healing recipes or weather prediction. The stones contain detailed instructions for organizing communities, not through the application of force, but through the careful cultivation of mutual benefit. The ancient priestesses had been more than healers. They had been advisors, negotiators, and most importantly, keepers of the social bonds that held settlements together during the kind of hard times that could tear communities apart. "Your ancestors understood something we seem to have forgotten," Leif explains one evening as they work by the light of oil lamps fueled by rendered fat. "True strength doesn't come from having the sharpest sword or the most fearsome reputation. It comes from creating connections between people that make swords unnecessary. These halls weren't built to house warriors preparing for battle. They were built to house wisdom that made battles avoidable." The runestones reveal a sophisticated understanding of human nature and social organization that impresses even the well-traveled skald. They speak of justice systems based on restoration rather than punishment, of economic arrangements that ensured prosperity was shared rather than hoarded, of diplomatic methods that could resolve conflicts before they escalated to violence. The knowledge is practical rather than mystical, grounded in centuries of observation about what actually works when people must live together in difficult circumstances. As winter deepens and the hall becomes an unofficial gathering place for those seeking shelter from the worst storms, the space begins to fulfill its ancient purpose without conscious planning. Stormbound travelers share news from distant lands, creating an informal network of information that proves valuable to farmers planning next year's crops and traders calculating which goods will be in demand come spring. Young people come initially to hear Leif's tales of distant wonders, but stay to learn from Inge's growing collection of practical knowledge. Even some of Father Olaf's congregation begin slipping in quietly during the worst weather, finding that the old healing songs and the Christian prayers can coexist in their hearts without contradiction. The herbs that ease winter coughs work regardless of the faith of those who gather them, and the stories that preserve important knowledge serve their purpose whether told by Christian or pagan voices. But Thorvald's opposition hardens as he watches the informal gatherings and recognizes the threat they represent to his carefully maintained authority. When his own wife, Astrid, named for Inge's mother in the days when such naming was considered an honor, brings their daughter for treatment of a persistent cough that has lingered since the first snowfall, he makes his displeasure known in ways that cannot be ignored. "My family will seek help from the village healer or from Father Olaf's prayers," he announces publicly in the village square. "We will not encourage practices that divide our community or undermine the faith that has sustained us." But his words ring hollow to those who remember that the village healer has already admitted his inability to help the child. And Father Olaf's prayers, however sincere, have not broken the fever that threatens to settle into her lungs. Magnus uses the enforced isolation of winter to develop plans that could transform Ravenshallow's prospects completely. The stellar navigation charts, he realizes, could revolutionize northern trade if properly utilized. Come spring, he will take copies of the most important sections and use them to re-establish connections with trading networks that have operated without Ravenshallow for decades. If Inge can restore the hall's ancient role as a center of wisdom and neutral ground for dispute resolution, he can restore its equally important function as a secure way station for valuable cargo and a meeting place for merchants who need to trust in fair dealing. The discovery that will change everything comes when Magnus explores the deepest storage chamber of the hall. Following architectural clues hidden in the stellar navigation charts that suggest the building holds more secrets than even the hidden runestone chamber revealed. Working by torchlight in spaces that haven't been disturbed for generations, he notices inconsistencies in the stonework that speak of deliberate concealment rather than simple construction. Behind a wall that appears completely solid but yields to pressure applied in a specific sequence marked by nearly invisible runes, Magnus finds a sealed chamber that contains documents more precious than any treasure hoard. The blood-sealed charter, written in 3 languages and bearing the wax seals of long-dead kings, establishes legal truths that will reshape everything they thought they knew about Ravenshallow's history and governance. The charter, dating back over 2 centuries to the reign of kings, whose names are now remembered only in the oldest songs, makes devastatingly clear that the land itself, not just the hall but all of Ravenshallow and its surrounding territories, was granted in perpetuity to the Peaceweaver lineage. The grant was made in recognition of their crucial role as neutral mediators between warring kingdoms, establishing the settlement as a sanctuary where conflicts could be resolved without bloodshed and agreements could be negotiated under the protection of ancient law. "Mother," Magnus breathes, his voice shaking as he reads the implications written in formal Latin, Old Norse, and the runic script that predates both. This means Harold never actually owned this land. He was granted use of it by your grandmother in her role as hereditary peace weaver. But when she died and Mother never claimed her inheritance, he simply took control and let everyone assume he held it by right of conquest. The legal authority that everyone in Raven's Hollow has assumed belonged to various chieftains actually belongs to Inge's family line, and has belonged to them since before the current political structures were established. The warrior chiefs who have ruled through the decades weren't independent lords, but custodians, appointed to enforce the decisions of the true ruling family and serving at the peace weaver's pleasure. But the charter reveals an even more stunning truth that explains Harold's bitter resentment in ways that make his whole life suddenly comprehensible. Thorvald's grandfather was originally appointed as military protector by Inge's grandmother, with explicit understanding that he served to enforce the peace weaver's judgments rather than rule in his own right. The authority that Thorvald considers his birthright is actually a trust that was never properly transferred and has been maintained through usurpation rather than legitimate succession. The revelation explains mysteries that have puzzled everyone who knew Harold well. His consuming anger at having no sons wasn't just wounded pride. It was the frustrated rage of a man who knew that everything he had built would inevitably pass to a bloodline he could never join. His treatment of Inge wasn't simple preference for male heirs. It was the desperate attempt to drive away the person who represented his deepest failure as a leader. Inge studies the charter with growing amazement, recognizing her mother's careful script in the margins where later clarifications have been added to the original document. Astrid had known about this legal reality, but had chosen never to claim her authority, perhaps thinking the knowledge too dangerous, or perhaps hoping that Inge would never need to wield such power. But the document is unambiguous, witnessed by respected scholds, and sealed with both Christian and pagan authority that transcends any particular religious allegiance. The implications ripple outward like stones cast into still water, touching every aspect of Raven's Hollow's political and economic life. If Inge is the rightful ruler, then every significant decision Thorvald has made regarding trade regulations, legal judgments, and military actions can be challenged as exceeding his authority. The merchants who have been establishing relationships with the Hall aren't just trading partners. They're recognizing the restoration of legal authority that predates most of the current royal houses in the northern kingdoms. More importantly, the charter is backed by international agreements that are still honored throughout the region. Raven's Hollow's neutrality in trade disputes isn't just traditional courtesy but legal obligation enforced by treaties that neighboring kings continue to respect because maintaining a neutral ground for negotiations serves their own interests. In avoiding costly wars, Leif the Learned, recalled from his planned departure by urgent message, examines the charter with the methodical attention of someone who has seen many such documents in the great centers of learning. This is not only authentic, he confirms after hours of careful study, it's one of the most important legal documents in the northern kingdoms. The agreement guaranteeing Raven's Hollow's neutrality has prevented at least 3 major wars in the past century. Kings still honor this compact because it provides them with a place to negotiate that neither side can claim as giving advantage to their enemies. Word of the charter's discovery reaches Father Olaf and Bishop Magnus within hours, and carried by villagers whose understanding of its implications may be limited but whose recognition of its importance is absolute. The religious authorities see opportunity in the chaos of changing leadership. If they can position the Christian Church as supporter of Inge's legitimate claim while painting Thorvald as a usurper who has violated sacred law, they can gain influence they never could have achieved under the warrior's undisputed rule. Thorvald's reaction is swift and desperate when he learns of the document's existence. He cannot openly challenge a legal charter witnessed by kings and sealed with royal authority, but he can claim it's a forgery created by ambitious people seeking to justify their grab for power. His accusations might seem absurd to anyone who examines the evidence carefully, but desperate men often find followers among those who fear change more than they value truth. The village divides along new lines that cut across traditional loyalties and create alliances that surprise everyone involved. Those who have prospered under the renewed trade support Inge's claim, recognizing that stability and legal legitimacy serve their long-term interests better than the arbitrary authority of whoever happens to be strongest. But Thorvald's warriors, faced with the prospect of reduced importance in a world where disputes are resolved through mediation rather than force, stand with their leader out of both loyalty and self-interest. Some villagers, frightened by the rapid changes and uncertain about what legitimate authority might mean for their daily lives, prefer the familiar system they understand to ancient claims they cannot evaluate. The prospect of major political change always creates anxiety among people whose survival depends on knowing how power actually works. And Thorvald skillfully plays upon these fears. Magnus realizes they face a choice that will determine not just their own futures, but the character of their community for generations to come. "We could enforce this charter through legal channels," he tells his mother as they discuss their options in the quiet of the restored hall. "The neighboring kings would eventually support our claim because it serves their interests to maintain Ravenshallow's neutral status, but only after civil conflict that would destroy everything we've worked to build." Inge, wearing the Peace Weaver's crown that now carries the weight of legal authority as well as ancient tradition, considers their alternatives with the careful thought that the document demands. The charter gives her the right to rule, but true leadership requires the consent of those being led. She could use the legal document to demand Thorvald's immediate submission, but such demands rarely create the kind of lasting peace that allows communities to prosper. "We'll call for a thing," she decides, invoking the ancient democratic assembly where all free citizens could vote on matters affecting the community's welfare. Let the people choose whether they prefer traditional authority based on force or legitimate authority based on law. Whatever they decide, we'll honor their choice and work to make it succeed. The announcement of the thing electrifies Ravenshollow with an energy that transforms the village from a sleepy northern settlement into something approaching a political center. It has been decades since the ancient democratic assembly was called, and some villagers barely remember how such gatherings function, while others recall the traditional procedures with excitement. That speaks to deep hunger for genuine participation in decisions that affect their lives. The preparations for the thing become a battle of hearts and minds that will determine not just who rules Ravenshollow, but what kind of community it will become. Both sides understand that victory depends less on legal arguments than on the villagers' vision of their own future. Their assessment of which approach offers the best hope for prosperity and security in an uncertain world. Inge spends her days walking among the people, not campaigning in any obvious sense, but simply listening with the patience of someone who genuinely wants to understand their concerns and fears. She visits the miller whose daughter she healed, hearing about grain prices and harvest prospects that could affect the family's survival through the coming winter. She sits with the blacksmith who remembers her mother's kindness, learning about the tools and weapons the village needs and the metals required to make them. She talks with farmers who have already seen benefits from the renewed trade, understanding how prosperity flows through a community and touches lives in ways that extend far beyond simple commerce. But she also seeks out Thorvald's supporters, recognizing that their concerns deserve attention and respect, even if their conclusions differ from her own. Many are good people who worry that rapid change will bring instability, that ancient legal documents might not protect them when practical threats arise, that wisdom and fairness are luxuries they cannot afford, in a world where survival often depends on strength and decisive action. What if the merchants stop coming? Asks Olaf the ropemaker, a practical man with 6 children whose survival depends on steady income from his craft. What if your legal papers don't matter to the next generation of kings? Thorvald's sword we can see and understand. These ancient rights and neutral treaties, who knows if they'll protect us when real trouble comes calling? The speaker's staff emerges from the charter chamber's final sealed alcove, discovered when Magnus notices that the room's proportions don't match its apparent size and investigates the discrepancy. This ceremonial rod, topped with carved ravens, whose obsidian eyes seem to track movement throughout the chamber, grants its holder the right to address the thing without interruption, a sacred obligation that even enemies must honor according to the ancient laws that govern such assemblies. More importantly, the staff carries enchantments similar to those found in the merchant scales of truth. Speakers who hold it while deliberately lying find their voices failing at crucial moments, their words becoming jumbled in ways that make their dishonesty obvious to everyone present, their carefully prepared arguments collapsing into confusion that leaves audiences more skeptical than convinced. Magnus works to gather support from the expanding merchant community, bringing testimony from traders who remember the old days when Ravenhollow's neutrality made it invaluable to commercial networks throughout the northern kingdoms. Letters arrive from as far south as the Frankish territories and as far east as the Russian principalities, confirming that the blood-sealed charter is not only recognized but actively honored by current rulers who see continued value in maintaining a neutral ground for negotiations. The economic arguments prove compelling to those who think in practical terms about prosperity and security. Trade relationships, once established, tend to generate wealth consistently over many years, while raiding produces sporadic windfalls that cannot be predicted or sustained. The merchants offer long-term contracts that guarantee regular income for the village, steady demand for local products, and access to goods that cannot be obtained through conquest. But Thorvald proves himself a skilled opponent who understands exactly how to frame the debate in terms that resonate with people's deepest fears and uncertainties. Rather than defending his usurpation directly, a position that would be difficult to maintain given the documentary evidence, he shifts the discussion to practical concerns about security and survival in a dangerous world. "I don't question the ancient papers," he announces publicly, his tone reasonable and measured in ways that make his position seem thoughtful rather than desperate. "But I question whether ancient ways can handle modern threats. When Danish raiders eye our newfound wealth, will Inge's healing songs turn aside their longships? When pirates come for our trade goods, will her fair-dealing scales deflect their weapons?" It is a potent argument that resonates with those who have lived through raids and remember the violent uncertainties that have marked recent decades. The warrior's protection, however flawed or arbitrary, offers immediate and visible security. The peace weaver's protection works through complex networks of alliance and obligation that require faith to believe in and sophisticated understanding to appreciate. Father Olaf finds himself caught between competing loyalties that make his position increasingly uncomfortable. Initially supportive of Inge as a preferable alternative to purely pagan warrior culture, he grows concerned as the ancient ceremonies associated with the thing become more prominent in village life. The speaker's staff, the ritual circles, the invocation of old gods alongside Christian prayers all threaten his vision of a thoroughly Christianized community that looks to church authority for guidance in both spiritual and temporal matters. Bishop Magnus, arriving from the cathedral city with expectations of finding simple pagan revival that can be suppressed through proper church authority, discovers a situation far more complex than Father Olaf's letters had suggested. The prosperity is undeniable. The fairness of dealing goes beyond question, and many of the merchants involved are devout Christians who see God's blessing in whatever form it appears. After careful consideration, The bishop offers a compromise that serves multiple interests, while avoiding direct confrontation with forces he cannot easily control. Let the thing proceed according to ancient custom, he counsels, but let it be conducted under Christian auspices, with Christian prayers for wisdom and Christian witness to ensure fairness. If God favors the peaceweaver's claim, the outcome will demonstrate his will. If he favors the warrior's leadership, that too will be made clear. 3 days before the scheduled thing, an unexpected crisis tests both sides' claims about their ability to protect the village and handle real threats. A ship arrives bearing refugees from a coastal settlement that was destroyed by Danish raiders. The survivors exhausted and traumatized by experiences that bring the outside world's dangers directly into Ravenshollow's consciousness. Refugees tell of warriors who came not for the simple plunder that has motivated most raids in recent years, but for information about Ravenshollow's renewed prosperity and the trade wealth that flows through the restored hall. The Danes, it seems, have been asking specific questions about shipping schedules, cargo values, and defensive preparations, the kind of intelligence gathering that suggests planned assault, rather than opportunistic raiding. The news electrifies the village and provides both sides with evidence for their positions. Thorvald sees vindication of his warnings about the inadequacy of peaceful approaches to genuine threats, while Inge must prove that her methods can handle real dangers rather than theoretical problems. The refugees themselves, traumatized and desperate, provide a stark reminder that the wider world remains violent regardless of legal documents or ancient wisdom. Inge's response surprises everyone, including some of her own supporters. Rather than downplaying the threat or offering reassurances she cannot guarantee, she gathers the refugees in the Great Hall and begins the systematic work of healing that goes far beyond treating physical wounds. Using techniques preserved in the ancient texts, she helps them process the psychological trauma that could cripple them for years if left untreated, while also gathering detailed intelligence about the raiders' numbers, ships, apparent destination, and tactical methods. Magnus, meanwhile, activates the information network that has grown around the renewed trade relationships, sending swift warnings to allied merchants and friendly kingdoms throughout the region. The communication system, built on fair dealing and mutual trust, proves its worth for defense as readily as for commerce, with messages racing across the northern seas to coordinate responses to the Danish threat in ways that no single settlement could manage alone. The night before the thing, both sides hold vigil in their own ways, knowing that tomorrow's decision will shape Ravenshollow's future for generations to come. Thorvald and his warriors sharpen weapons and review battle plans, preparing for what they see as inevitable conflict with enemies who respect only force. Inge and her supporters gather in the Great Hall for something more complex, a ceremony of commitment to accept whatever choice the community makes, even if it goes against their personal interests and beliefs. Dawn breaks over the circle of judgment, the ancient stone ring that has witnessed countless decisions throughout Ravenshollow's history and now prepares to host the most important democratic assembly in living memory. The standing stones, each carved with symbols representing different aspects of justice and community decision-making, catch the morning light in ways that make their weathered surfaces seem to glow with inner purpose. The circle of judgment itself tells the story of how governance was meant to function in the days when the peace weavers held undisputed authority. Unlike the simple raised platforms where chieftains typically address their followers from positions of physical dominance, the stone circle creates a space where all voices carry equal weight and every citizen can see and hear everything that transpires. The ancient architects understood that legitimate authority must be granted rather than seized, earned through wisdom rather than imposed through force. Leif the Learned arrives early to serve as the thing's moderator, a role that requires absolute neutrality and deep knowledge of the traditional procedures that govern such assemblies. His presence lends gravity to the proceedings. That goes beyond simple respect for his age and learning. He represents connection to the wider world of knowledge and law that extends far beyond any local dispute. Today you argue not just for control of this village, he tells both sides as they prepare for the formal opening, but for your vision of what human community should be. Choose words that illuminate rather than obscure, arguments that heal divisions rather than deepen them. Remember that whatever is decided, you must all continue living together when this day ends. The villagers gather with an anticipation that speaks to their hunger for genuine participation in decisions that will shape their lives. Families arrive dressed in their finest clothes, treating the assembly with the reverence due to a sacred occasion. Children who are too young to vote watch with wide eyes, absorbing lessons about democratic participation that will influence their own understanding of citizenship for decades to come. Thorvald speaks first, as tradition grants to the current holder of authority, and his arguments are carefully crafted to appeal to the practical concerns that weigh most heavily on people struggling to survive in a harsh world. He does not deny the authenticity of the blood-sealed charter or question Inge's legal right to claim leadership, recognizing that such challenges would be futile given the documentary evidence. Instead, he focuses on the gap between legal authority and practical capability, between ancient agreements and modern realities. The Charter speaks of times when kings honored treaties and merchants respected neutral ground, he says, his voice carrying easily across the assembled crowd. But we live in an age when Danish raiders burn settlements for sport and pirates take whatever they can carry. Legal documents cannot stop longships or turn aside. Sword blades. His words resonate with those who have lived through raids and remember the fear that comes with facing enemies who acknowledge no law beyond superior force. The warrior's protection may be imperfect, but it is immediate and comprehensible in ways that complex treaties and ancient agreements are not. Thorvald continues with arguments that reveal his sophisticated understanding of his audience's deepest concerns. I do not oppose trade or prosperity, he says, but prosperity that cannot be defended is just an invitation for those who prefer taking to earning. The merchants who come here now do so because they believe we can protect their goods and their lives. Remove that protection, and they will find other routes that do not require them to trust in parchments and prayers. When Inge rises to respond, the speaker's staff in her hands seems to gather the morning light and focus it into something that compels attention without demanding it. Her voice, when she speaks, carries not the commanding tone of someone seeking to dominate, but the persuasive clarity of someone offering wisdom freely given. Thorvald speaks truly about the dangers we face, she begins, surprising many who expected her to minimize the threats he has outlined. The world beyond our borders contains those who would take what we have built through violence and destruction. But I question whether meeting force with force is our only choice, or even our best choice. She speaks of the refugees' testimony about Danish intelligence gathering, but interprets it differently than her opponent. They came seeking information because they do not understand what we have become, she says. Raiders are accustomed to isolated settlements that can be overwhelmed by superior numbers. They do not expect to find a community connected to merchant networks throughout 3 kingdoms, defended not by a single chieftain's warriors, but by treaties that make attacking us an act of war against multiple powers. The demonstration of the merchants' scales during her presentation provides dramatic evidence for her claims about the power of reputation and fair dealing. When a merchant volunteer places false weights on the scales while claiming they are accurate, the bronze grows warm and the runes glow with uncomfortable intensity that makes everyone present uneasy. But when honest weights are used, the scales remain cool and balanced, their accuracy beyond question. This is what we offer the world, Inge says, gesturing to the scales that have become a symbol of absolute fairness. Not just goods or services, but trust itself. A place where agreements can be made with confidence, where disputes can be resolved without bloodshed, where prosperity grows through cooperation rather than conquest. Her arguments gain power from their connection to immediate, practical benefits that villagers have already experienced. The trade relationships have brought not just wealth but stability, steady income that can be predicted and planned for, access to goods that improve daily life, connections to the wider world that provide opportunities for young people who might otherwise have no choice. But to leave Raven's Hollow in search of better prospects, but it is when she addresses the question of defense that her response proves most compelling. Rather than dismissing the very real threats that face any prosperous community, she explains how the ancient Peace Weaver system was designed to handle exactly such challenges through methods that prove more effective than simple military force. The old way was never pacifism, she says, her voice carrying conviction that comes from deep study of the historical records. It was a sophisticated understanding that true security comes from making yourself more valuable as an ally than as an enemy. The Danish raiders gather intelligence about us because they do not yet understand that attacking Raven's Hollow means attacking every trading partner we serve, every kingdom that benefits from our neutral ground for negotiations. She speaks of messages already sent to allied kingdoms, of merchant princes who have pledged their own resources to defend the trade routes that flow through Raven's Hollow, of treaties that make aggression against the settlement a violation of international law that will bring swift retaliation from multiple directions. The network of relationships built on fair dealing becomes a defensive system that no single warrior, however brave, could match. The morning progresses with testimony from various villagers, each offering their perspective on which form of leadership better serves the community's needs. The miller speaks of steady grain purchases that have stabilized his family's income for the first time in years. The blacksmith describes orders for specialized tools that showcase his skills and bring premium prices. Young mothers tell of children who have thrived under Inge's healing care when traditional methods had failed, but Thorvald's supporters offer equally compelling testimony about the uncertainties that come with rapid change. Elderly warriors speak of battles fought and won, when strong leadership made the difference between survival and destruction. Practical villagers worry about the complexity of systems they do not fully understand, preferring the simplicity of known authority to the complications of ancient law and international agreements. The testimony reveals a community genuinely divided, not along lines of simple self-interest, but according to fundamentally different visions of how the world works and what strategies offer the best hope for survival and prosperity. Both sides present arguments with merit. Both offer solutions that could succeed under the right circumstances. Both demonstrate sincere concern for the village's welfare. As the sun reaches its zenith and the formal presentations near their end, it becomes clear that the decision will be close and that whichever side prevails will need to govern a community where nearly half the population initially preferred the alternative approach. The weight of that reality settles over the assembly like a sobering reminder that democratic decisions create obligations for winners and losers alike. The voting takes place as the afternoon sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the circle of judgment that seem to emphasize the weight of the decision being made. Each eligible villager approaches the ancient voting stones, smooth river rocks, that have been used for such purposes since the settlement's founding, and places their choice in one of two carved urns that represent the competing visions for Raven's Hollow's future. The process unfolds with ceremonial gravity that transforms a simple, administrative procedure into something approaching a sacred ritual. Leif the Learned calls each name from the official rolls, ensuring that every voice is heard and every vote is counted. The silence between each name creates space for reflection, allowing both the voters and the observers to feel the full significance of what they are witnessing, a community choosing its own destiny through democratic participation rather than accepting whatever fate, force, or chance might impose. As the voting progresses, patterns begin to emerge that reflect the complex divisions within the village. The merchant families and those who have directly benefited from the renewed trade relationships support Inge's claim with predictable consistency. But the backing she receives from some unexpected quarters, including several of Thorvald's former warriors who have come to appreciate the stability that fair dealing provides, suggests that the appeal of the Peaceweaver approach extends beyond simple economic self-interest. Similarly, Thorvald's support comes not just from his traditional followers, but from villagers whose concerns about rapid change and uncertain security have convinced them that familiar authority, however imperfect, offers greater safety than untested alternatives. The voting reveals a community struggling to balance hope against fear, optimism about new possibilities against practical worries about immediate survival. When the last vote is cast and Leif begins the formal counting, the tension in the circle becomes almost tangible. Both sides have presented their cases with skill and sincerity. Both have demonstrated genuine concern for the village's welfare, and both have attracted support from people whose judgment deserves respect. The outcome will determine not just who rules, but what kind of community Ravenshollow will become, whether it will embrace the ancient wisdom that emphasizes cooperation and fair dealing, or return to the simpler certainties of warrior leadership and traditional authority. The count proceeds slowly, with each vote removed from its urn and displayed publicly before being placed in the appropriate pile. The transparency of the process ensures that no one can question the legitimacy of the result, but it also increases the dramatic tension as the relative positions of the two sides shift with each revealed choice. When Leif announces the preliminary count showing Inge with a narrow but significant lead, the silence that follows speaks to everyone's recognition that they have witnessed something momentous. The margin of victory is not overwhelming, reflecting the genuine division within the community, but it is clear enough to establish legitimacy and broad enough to suggest that the Peaceweaver approach has captured the imagination of more than just a narrow faction. But before anyone can celebrate or mourn, a commotion at the circle's edge draws everyone's attention to a development that will test the new authority immediately. A ship has been spotted approaching from the east, flying colors that are not immediately recognizable but carrying enough armed men to constitute a serious threat to any settlement that cannot mount an effective defense. The timing seems almost supernatural in its dramatic perfection, just as Ravenshollow has chosen to embrace the path of peace weaving over the way of warriors. Potential enemies appear to challenge that choice in the most direct possible manner. Thorvald's supporters exchange meaningful glances that seem to say their warnings about the inadequacy of peaceful approaches have been vindicated before the new leadership has even had a chance to take effect. But Inge's response to the crisis demonstrates why the villagers chose her approach over the alternatives. Instead of panicking or defaulting to purely military solutions, she immediately activates the communication networks that Magnus has established with allied traders and friendly kingdoms. Messages race out on fast ships and swift horses, alerting the wider community of merchants and rulers who have vested interests in Ravenshollow's continued prosperity and neutrality. More importantly, she sends a delegation to meet the approaching ship under a flag of truce, offering the kind of diplomatic contact that often reveals threats to be misunderstandings and enemies to be potential allies who simply lack accurate information about changed circumstances. The delegation includes both Magnus, whose reputation as a fair dealer has spread throughout the trading networks, and two of Thorvald's most respected warriors, whose presence demonstrates that the Peaceweaver's approach does not mean abandoning all forms of strength. The approaching ship proves to be carrying not Danish raiders but Norwegian merchants, who have been following rumors about Ravenshollow's revival as a trading center. Their armed escort, which had seemed threatening from a distance, turns out to be protection for valuable cargo rather than preparation for assault. The misunderstanding provides a perfect demonstration of how assumptions about hostile intent can escalate situations that diplomacy might resolve peacefully. As evening falls and the immediate crisis resolves into an opportunity for profitable trade negotiations, the village gathers once more in the circle of judgment to witness the formal transition of authority. Thorvald, demonstrating the grace that marks true leadership, publicly accepts the democratic decision and pledges his support for the new approach, while privately reserving the right to say, "I told you so," if future events prove his warnings correct. The ceremony concludes with Inge accepting the formal symbols of leadership, not just the peaceweaver's crown, but the ancient staff that grants authority, to speak for the community in negotiations with outside powers. But more important than any symbolic transfer is her commitment to govern through consultation and consensus rather than decree, to remain accountable to the same democratic process that brought her to power. As the stars appear in the darkening sky, Ravenshollow settles into its new identity as a community that has chosen wisdom over force, cooperation over conquest, and the patient work of building prosperity over the dramatic gestures of traditional warrior leadership. The path ahead remains uncertain, filled with challenges that will test every principle and assumption underlying the peaceweaver approach. But for the first time in generations, the village has consciously chosen its own direction, rather than simply accepting whatever fate, chance, and force might impose upon it. 5 years pass like seasons flowing into one another, each bringing changes that validate the village's choice to embrace the peaceweaver's path, while presenting new challenges that test the wisdom of that decision. Ravenshollow has transformed from a struggling northern settlement into something unprecedented in the region, a community that prospers through cooperation rather than conquest, that resolves conflicts through mediation rather than violence, and that has become wealthy beyond the dreams of any warrior's raid through the patient cultivation of trust and fair dealing. The Great Hall now bustles with activity throughout the trading season, its restored chambers housing merchants from kingdoms as distant as the Byzantine Empire and the emerging cities of what will someday be called Russia. The stellar navigation charts have revolutionized northern commerce, allowing traders to travel routes previously considered too dangerous, while reducing voyage times in ways that translate directly into increased profits for everyone involved. But more important than the economic benefits is the network of relationships that has grown around Ravenshollow's reputation for absolute fairness, connections that have created a web of mutual obligation and shared interest, extending across the known world. Inge, now 62 and bearing the confident bearing of someone who has found her true calling, moves through the hall with the measured pace of a woman who understands that real authority comes from service rather than domination. The peaceweaver's crown has become natural to her, its silver and iron seeming to catch light from sources beyond the physical torches and oil lamps that illuminate the great space. Her hair, now completely silver, frames a face that shows the wear of responsibility, but radiates the satisfaction that comes from work that serves a purpose larger than personal ambition. The key merchant scales of truth have become legendary throughout the trading world, their reputation for detecting dishonesty so well established that many agreements are made simply on the promise that they could be verified by the Ravenshollow scales if necessary. The mere existence of such absolute arbitration has raised the standard of honesty throughout the northern trade networks, creating a culture where reputation matters more than momentary advantage, and where long-term relationships are valued over quick, Prophet's Magnus has evolved from a skilled but conventional sea captain into something approaching a merchant prince. His ships welcomed in ports throughout the known world because they carry not just goods, but the guarantee of fair dealing that has become synonymous with the Raven's Hollow name. His success has attracted other young traders to the village, creating a community of maritime commerce that brings steady prosperity while maintaining the values that made such success possible. But the true measure of the transformation lies not in material wealth, but in the quality of life that prosperity has enabled. The village boasts the lowest infant mortality rate in the region, thanks to Inge's systematic application of the healing knowledge preserved in the ancient texts. Disputes that might have led to blood feuds in other settlements are resolved through mediation that leaves all parties satisfied with the outcome. Young people who might have had no choice but emigration now find opportunities for education and advancement that keep families together while enabling individual growth. The defensive challenges that Thorvald had warned about have indeed materialized, but in forms that validate the Peaceweaver approach rather than undermining it. When Danish raiders finally attempted to attack Raven's Hollow 3 years after the Thing, they found themselves facing not just the village's own defenses but coordinated resistance from allied trading partners who had too much invested in the settlement's continued operation to allow its destruction. The raiders, accustomed to isolated targets that could be overwhelmed through superior numbers, withdrew when confronted with opposition that included ships from 4 kingdoms and land forces that outnumbered their own by 3 to 1. More importantly, the attempted raid led to diplomatic negotiations that transformed potential enemies into trading partners. The Danish leaders, recognizing that they could gain more through commerce than conquest, established their own permanent representatives in Raven's Hollow and began channeling their people's energy toward trade expeditions rather than raids. The transformation illustrates the fundamental principle underlying the Peaceweaver philosophy. That conflict often stems from unmet needs that can be addressed through cooperation rather than competition. Thorvald himself has become one of Inge's most valued advisors. His practical understanding of military matters, essential to a defensive strategy that emphasizes deterrence through strength rather than aggression through force. His initial skepticism about the Peaceweaver approach has evolved into appreciation for methods that achieve security without the constant violence that marked his earlier years as a leader. His son Eric, now 17 and fully recovered from his childhood injury, studies both traditional warfare and the newer diplomatic arts, preparing to serve a community that values both forms of strength. Father Olaf and Bishop Magnus have found ways to integrate Christian teaching with the older wisdom without compromising either tradition's essential insights. The healing herbs work as effectively when blessed with Christian prayers as when gathered according to ancient ritual, and the navigation charts guide ships carrying Christian missionaries as readily as those transporting pagan traders. The synthesis has created a spiritual life that draws strength from multiple sources while maintaining coherence around shared values of service, honesty, and concern for community welfare. The refugees who arrived during the crisis that preceded the Thing have become permanent residents, their skills and perspectives enriching the village's capabilities, while their gratitude providing ongoing testimony to the effectiveness of the Peaceweaver approach to healing not just individuals but entire communities. Their integration demonstrates the fundamental truth that strength comes through inclusion rather than exclusion, through expanding the circle of concern rather than defending narrow interests against outside threats. As another trading season draws to a close and the first hints of autumn color the surrounding forests, Inge stands in the great hall, surrounded by artifacts that tell the story of her family's legacy, the healing stones that connect her to generations of wise women, the star charts that guide travelers safely across dangerous seas, the scales that ensure fairness in all dealings. and the crown that symbolizes authority based on service rather than domination. Magnus approaches with the season's final trading reports, documents that record not just profit and loss, but the strengthening of relationships that will sustain the village through whatever challenges the future may bring. "Mother," he says, his voice carrying the respect of a successful man who knows that his achievements rest on foundations laid by others. The merchants are already planning next year's gatherings. They speak of making Ravenshollow a permanent center for northern commerce, of establishing formal trade courts that could serve the entire region. Inge nods. But her attention focuses less on the material success than on the deeper transformation that success represents. Through patient work and unwavering commitment to principles that once seemed impractical, she has proven that there are alternatives to the cycle of violence and revenge that has dominated northern life for generations. The hall that her father built as a monument to his own glory has become something far more valuable. A demonstration that human communities can choose cooperation over conflict, wisdom over force, and the patient cultivation of mutual benefit over the dramatic gestures of individual ambition. The silver ring that first caught her attention on that morning 5 years ago still glints in the doorframe, but now it reflects light from torches that burn steadily rather than guttering in ruins. Like the ring itself, Inge has discovered that what appears tarnished and worthless to those who cannot see past surface. Appearances may actually hold value beyond measure when viewed with eyes, trained to recognize the precious beneath the commonplace. As evening settles over Ravenshollow and the great hall fills with the comfortable sounds of a community at peace with itself and its place in the wider world, Inge reflects on the journey that brought her from exile to restoration, from isolation to connection, from the periphery of other people's stories to the center of her own. The woman who once thought herself past her prime has discovered that true strength often comes not at the beginning of life, but in its middle years, when experience has taught wisdom and loss has revealed what actually matters. The haul that cost her one silver piece has indeed proven worth far more than 4 million, not in gold or goods, but in the demonstration that ancient wisdom remains relevant to modern challenges, that communities can consciously choose their direction rather than accepting whatever fate chance might impose, and that a single person committed to serving something larger than personal ambition can transform not just her own life, but the lives of everyone around her. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities, new tests of the principles that have guided Ravenshollow's transformation. But tonight, as the fires burn steadily and the village sleeps in security born of mutual trust rather than superior force, Inge knows that she has honored not just her mother's memory, but the hopes of all those who preserved ancient wisdom through dark times, believing that someday someone would have the courage to kindle those old fires when the new age dawned.